Welcome to the program on microbicides and vaccines that we're going to be doing here from the CROI in Boston, the 21st CROI. A lot has gone on, 21 years of research at this conference, and there is the other conferences, and we're going to talk about what's happened here as well as what's happening at other recent conferences. So we have with us Mitchell Warren and Kevin Fisher from AVAC, who are both staunch activists and advocates for the field, and the field is becoming a little blurred, and we're going to kind of talk about that issue. So maybe you want to start it off?
Sure. You know, when we think about prevention, and particularly, I'm thinking of CROI, where several years ago, prevention was a tiny little part of CROI, and each successive year it's gotten a little bit bigger. And I think this year's a great example of the blurring of prevention and what we think about prevention, and also the blurring between prevention and treatment in a number of areas. But as an organization that began about the time of CROI 20 years ago, as AVAC focusing on AIDS vaccines, and now over the last several years focusing on the much broader area of prevention, there is this blur. There used to be conversations about microbicides, products that women and men might use on a daily or coital basis, and then there was conversations about vaccines. And what we're seeing, I think, is the filling in of a prevention paradigm, at least in product development, that takes us from the conventional daily products of oral PrEP, of microbicides, coitally used microbicides, to concepts of vaginal rings that you might be able to have inserted for 1 to 2 or 3 months at a time. And there was a lot of interesting data presented here. Obviously, a lot of talk about a long-acting injectable prevention method that could take you for 3 months. And at what point does it become a vaccine? And I think there's a lot of issues about nomenclature and naming things. At the end of the day, what we're looking for, though, is a range of options. And I always compare it to family planning. With each successive contraceptive advance, it didn't replace a method, it just added to the range of options. And I think we're beginning to see that we are working towards a paradigm that has many more options. And so CROI this year actually didn't have a ton on conventional microbicides or on conventional vaccines, but the paradigm was filled out. And I think that's one of the most exciting pieces. So the conversations about vaginal rings, about long-acting injectables, and about new vaccine concepts is really exciting and tantalizing in terms of the scientific conversation. The challenge, of course, is when will we have these methods? Except for oral PrEP, which is available in Truvada, we're still looking at a lot of things in development, not yet to deliver. And I think that is the area that we're hoping to move forward on more aggressively.
I think the important thing is, like you were saying, we have the conversations within science, and then we have the conversations within the community who's going to provide the pay for the implementation of this. And then you also have to have the conversation with the physician. Absolutely. Who's going to talk about, okay, this is where we're at now, this is what we have in your armamentarium that we can actually use today. And then we're also going to have those conversations ongoing because it's going to change.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's changing remarkably rapidly. And I think one of the biggest challenges as advocates is how do we ensure that all of those different constituencies are on board. The last thing we want is for science to move apace and in 10 years say, oh, we have this great result. Right. So a lot of the work is how do you ensure that policymakers, the media, communities that might participate in these trials or support them are engaged throughout the process. And it's hard because the concepts scientifically get more and more complex.
I was talking yesterday on one of the panels on the point was people are now aware of it. They'll see it in maybe one of the magazines or on our television program here, and they'll say, oh, we heard about PrEP. And they'll call me up and they'll say they know me. Where do I go for? Oh, just go to the county. and they call me back and say, wait a minute, the county doesn't know anything about this, or the county has thought about it but not really implemented.
Absolutely.
And so you just, I make the assumptions that this is the case, but it's not. It's like really a scary thing when you say, oh, it's automatically, it's there, but it isn't. It's not been rolled out. So it really is about the everybody pulling and pushing and being involved.
And I think actually this CROI is sort of unique in that there were a couple of sessions. There's one on PrEP and one on hormonal contraceptive and HIV risk, and they really had some really excellent discussions amongst a lot of different stakeholders. And it's one of the examples where really wasn't just a scientific presentation, but you heard advocates and also implementers speak up and talk about a lot of these issues about how PrEP is something that we know works. How would you implement it? Some examples, and even a young man who came up, a young adolescent who was taking PrEP and talked about his experiences. So we really were moving not as fast as we'd like, but at least it was an example where CROI was really providing some kind of forum for people to talk, and then also on a really interesting discussion about hormonal contraceptives and risk, and there's some basically retrospective data and sort of and the kind of question about whether it should be a clinical trial to really look at that issue, which wasn't resolved in the discussion, but it was a really important discussion to begin to have.
We really don't CROI has always been very stodgy on these first days. And like you say, it's really, it was a conference on retroviruses and opportunistic infections. Well, we don't have opportunistic infections the way we had them back in the old days. Now we have comorbidities and so forth. And we have a lot of other diseases that we're focusing on, hepatitis C for one, big time this year. But it seems as though we've really, it hasn't been a conference that's talked about behavioral issues as much as it should maybe, or that it's important to do so. And that becomes more important maybe at the IS meeting and so forth. You have those engagements of, like you say, those conversations that apparently are even starting to happen here that are important.
Well, they're also, I think the science has conventionally been, the bridge between basic science and clinical science, and that is what CROI has done so very well. I think we are seeing slowly but surely the conversations expanding, because at the end of the day, and this is true in therapy and in prevention, if we're not engaging the behavioral social science perspective, there was just a terrific plenary by Steph Bertozzi talking about managing treatment and prevention programs. For all the fruits of the scientific labor, which have been huge, and CROI has been for 21 years a hotbed of presenting that data, if we don't know what to do with the data programmatically, we won't have an impact on the epidemic. At the end of the day, the best science in the world doesn't end the epidemic. It's the application of that science. And I think there is a sense that CROI is beginning to expand in that regard, and connecting to some of the other conferences. Hopefully there'll be a little bit of rationalization of some of those conferences, because one can be on the conference circuit full time in the AIDS field. But I think the question of how do you begin to apply what we're learning scientifically in the real world settings, and that implementation science is beginning to find homes in places like CROI.
The cause and effect, and Bertozzi really did a great job of that. I mean, he had great advice to our new PEPFAR guru.
Absolutely. So well, Dr. Birx is going to have her hands full when she hopefully does get approved. But it's coming at a really exciting time. So you have the scientific conversation, whether we think about it in new prevention options, we think about it in new diagnostics, which are really taking the fore in a lot of conversations. We think about cure research. So we're having one of the most exciting scientific times in 31, 34 years of the epidemic. It's coming at one of the most challenging times economically. So we sit here at CROI, and we get excited by all these different scientific activities. We get excited because there's going to be a new head of PEPFAR. Global Fund has relatively new leadership. So there's all this energy, and yet this is the very week that President Obama released his budget for 2015, and it's not all good news. And we see NIH getting a very modest increase. And in fact, after years of seeing those reductions, we run the risk of flatlining and even seeing reductions in investments in science. And science got us to the point of being excited. And if we don't continue to invest, we have a problem. And at the same time, even as Dr. Birx is going in front of the Senate confirmation hearing today, there's less money for PEPFAR, potentially, that she will inherit. So the task is bigger. The investments need to keep pace with that. And so we're at this very interesting moment of how to do all of this. And one of the things that's always been true in AIDS, there are a lot of easy things to say. We need to be more efficient. We need to get more people into treatment. We need to do X and Y. Those are easy things to say. But it's not about getting people into treatment. It's about getting them virologically suppressed, and that means the continuation of care. It means being able to have better diagnostics to really track viral suppression. So there's a lot of excitement scientifically. There's a huge potential black cloud economically. And then it means how do you realign all of that to do the right things on the ground?
We have to work smarter. And I guess that's the only way, the only salvation we have. I think the government uses the cute word of recompeting rather than saying we're going to defund something. We're going to throw everything out for competition again.
Well, and when one looks at some of the scientific issues, again, that are exciting here, we need to recognize what the next 3 to 5 years look like. So when you look in the prevention space, we have now one microbicide gel that's in an efficacy trial right now, the tenofovir gel that was shown to work in Caprisa, didn't work as a daily product in voice, and it's in a confirmatory study that's going to finish this year. And we have then 2 other trials of a vaginal ring with dapivirine, an HIV prevention ring potentially, that's going to finish a trial next year. That's the entire efficacy landscape that's in trials now. The excitement here at CROI tells us that we might have a combined vaginal ring with an antiretroviral and a hormonal contraceptive in the ring for dual protection. That's going to need to go into an efficacy trial, and there are multiple rings. So 1 or more will go into efficacy trials potentially in 2015, 2016. The long-acting injectable PrEP, a lot of conversation here about GSK 744, but there's another product, TMC 278, that's in human clinical trials now. We need at least 1 or maybe even both in large-scale efficacy trials beginning in 2016, 2017. The enthusiasm in the vaccine community has been very much on the basic science. There's a lot of excitement around neutralizing antibodies. Some of those we hope would go into become vaccine candidates and would go into efficacy trials 2017, 2018. So we have this kind of gap right now of not much in efficacy, but over the next 3 to 5 years, potentially a great need for efficacy trials. So the question of where do we invest and doing all of that while we fill the gap of treatment. So we have huge needs out there for both delivering what we've got, but also for developing the additional tools. And we need to make sure we keep that long-term view, an end game strategy, so to speak, so we don't do one and not the other.
Right, and when you say we mean everyone,
Absolutely.
and that includes the participants in the trials.
Absolutely.
We have to say to the people in the that are maybe future candidates for trials that kind of go over that, because we don't want to give them false hope. We don't want to give them no hope. We want to get it appropriate and get that on the mark, because we don't know really what the future will bring, but we do know that we have to move forward.
Absolutely.
We have to have candidates, we have to have participants in trials, we have to accrue those trials in right times, and we also have to have a large percentage of, obviously some of them are specific for women, but percentage of women in trials that are, that are going to answer the question for all populations and all genders.
Absolutely.
So those are all really important things for people to become a little bit altruistic, where it may be important to be that, because we know that the patient, we put that in the informed consent, there may be and probably won't be a benefit to you in this trial or whatever however it lays itself out.
No, it's true, but there's also an issue right now that's happening. We've had success in clinical efficacy trials over the last 5 years. So, sitting here at CROI 2014, I can look back on the last 5 CROIs and remember conversations of the first vaccine to show protective effect in a trial with the Thai RV144 trial. We've had multiple years of PrEP results presented here with Truvada as daily PrEP. And we had, obviously, at the International AIDS Conference in 2010, 4 years ago now, the tenofovir gel result. So when we think about the trust and confidence in the research enterprise, one of the important things to remember is not just to be talking about what comes next down the pipeline in terms of future efficacy trials, but the important conversation of what happens after those trials that demonstrated efficacy. So what happens in Thailand, where 16,000 people participated in RV144? When is the next follow-on trial to confirm that result? Where will it be? And it's still uncertain when that trial is even going to start. What happens after the oral PrEP trials in terms of who can get access to PrEP? It's been approved in the US through the FDA 2 years ago, but still very limited programmatic support. And I think we have to remember that research often says we need to make sure people understand the clinical trial and enroll in the trial. completely true. But we also have to remember that participants and the communities that support those trials need to know that there is follow-up after that trial in terms of the next steps, so that their confidence and support and trust in the process isn't just to get through a phase 3 trial, but to actually get to public health impact. So it's an area that, frankly, the community at large, scientists, policymakers, funders, and advocates haven't done a good enough job of articulating kind of the pull-through from the phase 3 trial, so we get more and better demonstration projects, that we get the follow-on trial without a gap in time. And so we have some good news coming out of those trials, but the post-trial activities have been slow. I think it showed that the field was not ready for success, and so we've got our work cut out for us.
Well, another piece of it is that the community is allowed, we talk about the engagement of all parties in this and their advocacy efforts, and Kevin and I are involved with ATAC, which is a small group of people that move to that go into the meetings with the pharma that try to enlighten us as to what they're doing with the research. And I don't know, do you want to touch on that? Because it's really important that there is that component
Absolutely.
of us in the community addressing the issues as we can best describe them and need for the community, and also how the community might react and how it might participate in trials.
Yeah, I could sort of talk about ATAC, which I think is really important, because I think we can both represent participants and also the community, and I think that's really, I think, helpful both for the companies in figuring out whether they're putting the best foot forward and really responding to the actual need. But also in a way that allows us to begin to reach out to the community, even in terms of like letting them know about what things are on the horizon, and also getting some sense of kind of a reality check, but not in a clinical trial setting where you're not reading an informed consent. And AVAC has also done a work that's sort of related to this, on something called good participatory practice, where we've sort of with UNAIDS have created a tool really for communities to become engaged on a broader scale. So it's not just people who are participating in the trials, but really informing communities about the trial and what the plans for, what they hope to achieve, and then also trying to fill in that gap at the end, which is to set a community that understands or is capable of asking and capable of engaging on what might be the next steps. And so that's a piece, as Mitchell said, is very important, and that we're increasingly focusing on now, because it just becomes frustrating when you have these great tools and they're not being used.
Well, and I think we've seen exhibited a number of trials that have been started without community input,
yes.
And they were disasters. Just because I guess people were put off by the fact that they weren't engaged, and so it's you really have to do it. And then there is the other thing. You talk about the trials, which are the best chance for a drug or a compound to look good. And then there's the reality when it rolls out, and you want to try to mirror the trial as close as you can to the reality of the use. And one of the things I did learn from John Pottage in ViiV, and I'm sure that applies to probably other companies too, that they do not do any trials that are not going to be appropriate for use. We're talking about antivirals for pediatrics. They want to make sure that they're going to be translating and can be dispersed and all those things.
That's tremendously important.
It is. It's really important, and I never gave it a thought that they, it's almost selfish that I would say, okay, I want the drug anyway. But but a lot of times they have the option, and they can really research, and they can say, can we make this into sprinkles? Can we make this into a liquid formulation for the pediatrics? And I guess it's important because there may be times we may use that pediatric formulation for other applications.
Well, as we saw at the conference today, there's yet another a baby, I guess a Long Beach baby, over around Sherwood, that using early treatment has managed to get that baby's viral load to an undetectable level. So not clear what will happen. The baby's eye, as you know, is still on treatment, but there's some talk that they might consider taking the baby off treatment after a couple of years. And
lots of ethical issues around that.
Yes.
But yet very important information to be learned.
And it's one of the nice things about CROI is the intersection, as prevention advocates, the intersection of a lot of the research on aging and other areas. And so Serena Sputnik's presentation on CNS infection and about the importance of early treatment and reducing the brain, the possible brain reservoir, and that really linked in really nicely with some of the discussion about the infants, is because it's really increasingly those are two areas where they kind of are kind of coalescing together and working together and to try to understand.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, it's been really a delight to have you. As always, this is a I work with Kevin more than I do you, but definitely always great to have Mitchell here. He does the great wrap up of the work that's being done in a wide area of research. So thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.